My name is Hallie Leinhardt. I'm the Outreach Specialist for the Center for Financial Security at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Thanks everybody for joining us for today's webinar, Financial Clarity, an overview of financial services and concepts. Our presenters today are Lucy Delgadio, Associate Professor of Family, Consumer, and Human Development Department at Utah State University. We have Peggy Olive, Financial Capability Specialist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and UW Extension. And we have Jamie Letcher, Financial Advisor at Summit Credit Union. And I do just want to mention that the slides as well as the recorded presentation will be made available after the webinar has finished. So those will be up on our website, cfs.wisc.edu. To submit questions throughout the presentation, please type your question into the question and answer chat box that's located on the left-hand side of your screen, and we will try to reach all of those questions at the end of the presentation. That'll be the last 10 to 15 minutes. And with that, I would love to turn it over to Lucy.
Oh, yes, thank you. First, I want to thank the Center for Financial Security for their invitation, and mostly I would like to thank Hallie for all the work to make this happen. My name is Lucy Delgadillo. I'm an associate professor here at Utah State University and a housing scholar, a financial counselor, and a coach. I'm from Costa Rica, so just in case that you were wondering. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about financial clarity, and I hope that the audience will find it beneficial in understanding some of these nuances in this concept.
Sure.
We can go to the other one. So when we, the introduction in this webinar is based on an article that I wrote, and when I explain some of these concepts. So when you do a search on financial education in Google or any of these search engines, what I found was about 1,200,000,000 results. And they were interchangeably with knowledge and also with literacy. But out of those, because this is too much to analyze, what I did is a content analysis in a subsample of these different heads. And one of the mostly comprehensive definition that I found about financial education is presented by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And this one definition basically highlights three important concepts within financial education. And it's the issue of information, instructions, and advice, so that consumers can develop those skills and confidence to become aware of opportunities and risks when they are making their financial decisions. Financial education per se, it is considered a process, not a product. So given these three concepts that we have, providing information, instruction, and advice, that is basically a pattern across several definitions of financial education in different research articles and in Google Scholar. So that way we have the information means just giving clients access to fact and data. Instruction is the opportunity to acquire skills and knowledge to understand these financial terms. And advice is somewhat equated with the counsel on financial issues and product that they can make the best use or application on the information they have received. Financial literacy is then conceptualized as the output of this process called financial education. And there has been Sandra Houston, for example, present an overview of different meanings and measurements on financial literacy. And she also stated that these skills and knowledge are two dimensions or human capital. So it's a more comprehensive approach to define financial literacy. The Government Accountability Office also provides a financial literacy definitions. And the interesting fact that it is that they basically look at financial education plus the component of consumer behavior. So when we talk about financial literacy, which is the skill and knowledge, are these two synonyms? And these are basically two different domains. Knowledge is basically a cognitive domain. It refers to the internalized concept and principles. Skills, on the other hand, it is a behavioral domain. A skill alludes to the ability to use that knowledge and apply it in the content, in a specific content. So financial literacy, therefore, is going to involve this knowledge about finances, but also the application of that knowledge and skills to make the informed financial decisions. So when we thought that we have clear what financial education was from financial literacy and up to 2010, the present Advisory Council on financial capability has coined a new word that it was financial capability. And this council was formed by President Barack Obama through an executive order and gave the council the charge of finding a way to improve Americans' financial well-being. The two major contributions of that advisory council was the recognition that teaching that is not sufficient for financial education, and then also the conceptualization of the term financial capability. We can go next. Oops, okay, it's not showing the figure either, so go back, that's okay. But the thing with the council is that they conceive financial capability as three-legged concept, in which one is financial literacy, the other one is the access to financial products, and the other one is the legal and institutional framework for consumer protection. So basically what we are saying here is that this new definition of financial capability adds one level of complexity to financial education because it seeks to connect financial literacy with also asset building within a regulatory framework. Example of financial capability programs could be any that is more asset building programs. For example, the individual development account. So you will have in there the three components of financial literacy, the access to financial product, and also an institutional framework. In financial counseling and planning, given that for simplicity and given the time, I didn't provide for this presentation how financial counseling is defined by the different professional organizations or how financial planning is defined. But the important thing in here is that basically they differentiate in terms of the type of client that they serve, the type of problems that they deal with, and also the outcomes of the process. They have different competencies, they have different training for accreditations, either for financial counseling and financial planning. But at the end, these two professions complement each other. And the way that we can see that is we envision it as part of a continuum. This continuum not necessarily has to be linear. It could be also circular. So maybe you were going to have to start on one financial issue with financial counseling, and then you move forward to planning. But once you resolve that, perhaps the circle will start again from zero with a different topic. So consider it as a continuum, but there are some also differentiated features. Next. One thing that I would like to talk about briefly is that I have seen that sometimes we equate financial counseling with just remedial counseling. And in reality, financial counseling could take the forms of remedial, productive, and preventive, and they are not mutually exclusive. Remedial financial counseling is used when clients experience some kind of economic distress and they are in need of immediate intervention. Productive financial counseling, they don't need to overcome in major financial difficulties, but they would like to utilize their resources in the most productive way. Preventive, which is more a proactive, in a more proactive intervention, preventive financial counseling has features above the remedial and the productive counseling. These three forms of counseling will use similar processes and determine the needs and goals and establish objectives, but there are some developmental stages that they change how we manage the process. Next. Here's an example on how I visualize these different processes. The figure at the top illustrates the developmental stages of preventive and productive. The figure at the bottom illustrates the stages on remedial counseling. In both of them, regardless of what type of counseling we are doing, it is important to develop that relationship. For preventive and productive, perhaps the next stage is the exploratory stage. So where you really want to see, okay, what is this clients want to move forward? What are the goals, etc. And it could include short and medium long-term goals. And then you develop the action plans, allow for monitoring, in which also you will have to make adjustment in many cases. And then there is some kind of evaluation of the client's outcome. The developmental stages in the remedial financial counseling will start again with building that relationship, but then you fall, because it's an immediate situation, you will fall into a diagnostic stage. You want to see where this person is at and what will be the better short-term, immediate solutions. Sometimes these solutions are already predetermined by a specific protocol, and then what you do is you implement the action plan. Let me give you an example. If this were remedial counseling, we are talking about a foreclosure situation. So you build a relationship. The diagnostic state would allow you to have an assessment whether this client is more a candidate for a home retention option, or whether this client is going to be more a client for a disposition option. So one that is figured out according to a protocol set by the Department of Housing within the loss mitigation program, and then you follow with the actions and the implementation of the plan. Next. The other concept that I talk about in my paper, it is the financial coaching piece. And it is probably the most exciting part. Next. There are several definitions of financial coaching in the university. University of Wisconsin in Madison has done an excellent job. Like you have Michael Collins working there, you have Peggy Olive. There are also have seen other papers where there is an adaptation of the International Coaching Federation applied to financial coaching, but this is an emerging field. I choose to present this definition of financial coaching because this one is offered by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And I came across this definition recently in December. And I go like, that's very interesting. Because to me, that is almost, when you have a branch of government or an office in the government recognizing or trying to define this, I find that always very interesting. So when you go to the website and you search financial coaching, they basically compare that to financial education or counseling. So they will say, unlike financial education, which seeks to provide that information and knowledge that we talk about, or counseling, which is helping solve problems, coaching focuses on helping clients achieve their goal, and here is the key, performance improvement and behavior change. So the goal of financial coaching is to support those clients in developing the skills and behavior they will need in order to achieve their financial goals. Next. But still, it's a new field, it's an emerging field, somewhat unregulated right now because we don't have the specific competencies for financial coaching. But this new approach is advocating basically the behavior change. In the big picture, it probably has the influence of one of the streams of postmodernism particularly constructivism. So to me, it's fascinating to see the influence of postmodernism in family and consumer sciences. By constructivism, I mean we are right now presenting an opportunity so our clients can construct their own financial reality. It is mostly informed from evidence-based principles and theories coming from applied coaching psychology, including goal theory, hub theory with the work of Charles Snyder, theory of change, Prochaska, social cognitive theory, which will be Antonio Bandura and their concept of self-efficacy and self-regulation, but it also take on self-determination theory. There is a fascinating theory of human motivations, and it will look at the intrinsic and the extrinsic motivations for change. And of course, it has the foundation in positive psychology, Martin Seligman's work, and cognitive behavioral theory that initially was understood or conceived as rational emotive behavior, but then Professor Beck basically has been calling it cognitive behavioral approaches, theory. Financial coaching also borrow approaches from the mental health professions, including approaches like motivational interviewing, the MI that you have on the slide, neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, adult learning principle, which is called andragogy as opposed to pedagogy principles, solution-focused approaches, and humanistic approaches. Next. Now, so why coaching? Well, because coaching is more holistic. It would allow a setting and you can align the financial goals or basically the life goals of this person with their financial goals and values. It brings into a synergy the external and the external finances, and I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. It helps clients to overcome some cognitive distortions that will mediate later their current behaviors, but it also provides insight and perspective. So there is one scholar that say, by changing the viewing, we change the doing. So in this, basically what we are doing here, it is amplifying the existing resources, identifying what are the exceptions to the problem. When is a time when this problem was absent? How can you build self-efficacy? How can we construct platform for solution instead of dwelling in the problems? Moving away from asking the why and asking how instead. Creating a specific doable action steps or mini goals, sometimes recognized as SMART goals. What are the ways to leverage the resources? Another important issue here is accountability on part of the client. That is basically response to the alliance that you have between the coachee or the client and the coach. But central to this notion of coaching is going to be the skillful use of language, or what I call the soft skills, because that's how psychology uses it, but in my opinion, those are the hard skills. It's easier to talk about numbers and fact than actually be having a mastery of the skills so you can facilitate insight and perspective. Three more important concepts, it is the self-reflective piece. Before I talk about andragogy principles versus pedagogy principle, andragogy principle is adult learning. We hear often that the repetition is the mother of all learning. That might be true with kids, maybe 5, 10 years old, but adults, we need to tap more into self-reflections. So really transformative learning happens because we self-reflect on these experiences that we are having, and in particular case will be our financial experiences, our financial behaviors. So it will require also self-evaluations, and it will require the self-monitoring piece. But another important dynamic that is happening, not only in coaching but also in counseling, is what happened? What is the dynamic between the sessions? I met with a client, so here is session 1. And then we meet again, but what happened in between? So it's an interesting dynamic that eventually I'm going to study, but I don't have empirical data yet to talk more about that. So I'm going to move to the next slide. This figure, it was supposed to be included on the paper that is the basis, the financial clarity paper. I decided at the end not to include it because one single factor in here, and I'm going to explain it. So as you see in here, financial education is conceptualized as a process. The product of that financial education is what we call the financial literacy, that in this case, it will have two major components: knowledge, the cognitive component, and the skill, which is the behavioral component. Here are also other processes that help with this financial literacy, that it could be counseling, planning, and coaching. And even though here the arrows are completely differentiated, they should overlap somewhat. That's why I decided at the end, I'm not gonna include it because for some reason I couldn't make an overlap. So, but all of this financial literacy has to be tied, or it has to exist within a legal structure. And that is when the name financial capability comes into place, because it's allowed to access to the market products. Some economists call that the market choice architecture, but then also there is a minimum level of regulations that is in place to protect the consumers. So having said that, and because I think I have just only about a few more minutes, Holly also asked me to provide some comments on me applying all of this, what I say, in regard as a financial counselor. So we're going to move to the next slide. And I'm going to briefly talk about the financial counseling practices here at USU. A couple of years ago, we decided we wanted to move to a more integrated practice, given all those changes in our financial field. And to make it simple, I'm just going to use an example of a pre-purchase home intervention. The pre-purchase financial counseling that we do here at Utah State include components of education, counseling, and also elements of coaching. How that happened? Traditionally, before, if someone say, I would like to buy a house, we usually start with, are you ready to buy a home? This is the advantages and disadvantages on buying versus renting. They talk about budgeting, saving, credit report, type of mortgage, working with a realtor, etc. We also plug some numbers, numerical part, how much house can you afford. Next. We can go to the next slide now. Thank you. We still do that, but all of that was more in reference to what I call the external finances, all the numerical part. We have included now some components of internal finances, which is the intra and the interrelational aspect of money, meanings, feelings, emotions, plus also those recognitions of cognitive distortions. So basically, when in the previous slides, when I say counseling can take three forms and the developmental stages change, this will be one in which there is opportunities to do a little bit of exploration work. So we maybe start, instead of saying, oh, here's the advantages, jumping directly into advantages, disadvantages of buying a home, we basically do, okay, what does buying a home mean to you? And we can move to the next slide. So some people will give us all kind of answer. They will say, oh, I will feel in control, in totally balanced. I will be on the top of the world. In this case, this lady is on the top of water, or it will provide me a path for saving. So it is to me, is the best way that I can accumulate assets, increase my wealth. But then also some people say, I just tired of renting. I want to have some flexibility in what I do without being constrained. I'll guarantee these monkeys are not constrained to just where we're supposed to be. So people will have all kind of emotions and reactions. So next slide, please. We also talk about what does mortgage debt mean to you? We can go to the next. And this is very interesting because In my experience, there has been like a double accounting theory in here coming into place. The same way that people will see these frogs, and some people will react and say, oh, that's a beautiful creature. Look at all those colors. It's just gorgeous. Some people will say, those bright colors may represent that she's very poisoning, so yeah, I want to take away. It's the same with debt. Some people's mortgage debt or consumer debt will bring them a lot of stress. It brings them that feelings of economic pressure. For other people, mortgage debt is still going to be some kind of stress, but there is also a pleasure, an accomplishment, some level of satisfaction that are going to be derived from the utility of consumption, in this case, consumptions of a new home. Next. So briefly to describe in the next 2 minutes, what are the processes then at this counseling session for clients? So we're moving a little bit away from the correction approach to more on the connection approach. We're moving away from the, okay, here are my hardcore competencies, numerical competencies, to install more of a confidence on these people. We move away definitely from the problem talk to more a solution talk. We stop making evaluation. We don't ask the why. Why do you want to buy a house? No. We make observations if the process calls for that, but we'll be using words like what, the how, and where. We move away from the pedagogic principles and invite more of the self-reflection and experiential learning, which is the way that adults learned. We also invite for envisioning. Tell me about your home. What are your senses? And we ask them to describe the home that they have in their mind. And we stop also from imposing changes to helping clients understand the different levels of readiness, how ready I am to buy a home. Next. So, okay, well, that will be the last one. So that will conclude my part. And this has been some reference, so I'm going to turn the time to Peggy.
Hi, thanks, Lucy. And hopefully everybody can hear me okay. So Lucy did touch a bit upon financial education, and I'm just going to spend the next 10 minutes expanding on that a little bit more from a practitioner's perspective. I joined the Center for Financial Security this past summer, but I came from 19 years of doing financial education out in the communities through the University of Wisconsin Extension, just so you know a little bit about my background. Thinking about financial education, and as Lucy set the stage for us, we think about financial education as providing information, the facts, the data, what do people need to know, what do we think they need to know, the instructions surrounding the knowledge and skills that would be useful to know, and then the advice surrounding how do people apply this information to themselves or their situations. So financial education has many different approaches, many different faces. We have individual education where we might meet with somebody one-on-one in person through a distance learning, a Skype or a Google Hangout, or even a phone conversation doing that one-on-one education. We also have group financial education, which again could be in person or at a distance learning if you have many people on Skype or some type of learning format like we have here today. We have one-time or multiple lessons too, really with the individual or the group, depending on the format. Do you have just a one-shot deal in terms of the information you would like to get across, or do you have multiple lessons that can build upon each other? And then there's mass media that can be static or interactive. Static meaning it's just a one-way communication, like a newsletter, or perhaps you have just a standalone display. Or it could be more interactive if you have a website where a person can kind of click through different information, or a video, online game, that kind of thing. In terms of financial educators, there are different approaches that we use when we're trying to impart our information or our advice or that data and facts. At that beginning level, we have kind of that teaching, telling, explaining. there's a lot of different ways that you can just share data, you can just share facts, you can share kind of that black and white and get that information across. And then you move up the scale a bit to demonstrating, modeling, and then practicing and role-playing and case studies where you're actually involving your learners and your participants, where it's a lot more helpful in terms of learning and practicing the behaviors and the application that people are able to use once they leave whatever your learning event is. And I think where some confusion comes into play is that I would assert that a good financial educator does use counseling and coaching skills, those soft skills that Lucy mentioned in her presentation, using the active listening or reflection or reframing or asking those how or what or when questions. So, the more counseling and coaching skills you have and those communication soft skills, I think would make anyone a better financial educator also. Because financial education is a process, there's different frameworks where you can think about applying and approaching financial education. And I put an example of one here based on Joy Norris, who has a book, From Telling to Teaching. And I do have a few slides at my very end. I do have these resources listed, so don't feel like you have to scramble to write these down. But she has her book where she looks at a learner-centered approach for education. And this is mostly used in the nutrition field, and I like to think about this for also financial education, where in this approach you anchor whatever individuals are already doing. So what do your learners already know? What are they already doing? And then you add on to that. So what new information or resources are needed? For example, if our talk here today was a little more interactive, I would want to know what you're already doing for your financial education, what's working, what's not working so well, what new resources or new approaches are you interested in finding out more about. But because this is a one-way presentation, I'll just keep forging ahead. So we also think about applying. So once people are thinking about what they already do, what new information or skills they can add, that practice of, okay, well, how might this look? How is this going to work for me? Is this relevant to me even? And then how can I plan for using this in the future? So that away, or some people call it advance, if you have multi-sessions, more than one, you could think about some kind of homework. As Lucy mentioned, kind of what happens in between the education, because that can be just as powerful or more powerful than what happens when you actually have the face-to-face time with someone. So thinking about effective financial education, we know just with all education in general is that people have a lot going on, and the longer time passes from when we have information, we start to lose some of what we had learned, and we retain less and less. It's also known as decay, which really explains how my brain feels some days, but I digress there. So when we're looking at effective financial education, we know that good education will increase in an individual's knowledge, how much they can share back in terms of that data or the facts surrounding what they might need to do. It's a little less effective, but still has some promise when we look at behaviors. So what do people actually do with that knowledge? And I'm excited by the financial capability approach and more of the integration and focus on behaviors in our education. So thinking about youth financial education, I'm citing a recent study by Michael Collins here at the center and a group of his colleagues about learning and retention for middle school youth. And they find that the education is more effective and it's retained longer and more is retained when it's combined with access to products. So when middle school youth were learning about personal finances and saving, when they were given access to a savings account, they retained more of that information. It was more pertinent and more personal. And the same is true with adults. There was a meta-analysis, actually it was 2014 by Fernandez et al., and finding that the more immediately somebody can use that financial education information, the more promising the results. For example, they looked at different lengths of a financial education intervention. And if you have a 1-hour workshop and somebody is able to go out and use that information within that next month and use the information immediately, that's going to be just as effective as an 18 hours of instruction after 10 months. So because people are slowly losing that information, they can only retain so much over time. I would say, based on their meta-analysis, that looking at 12 to 18 to 24 hours of instruction, you will have lasting effects for the next year. But again, there is a big drop-off in what people retain. And also just thinking about connecting learning to the internal motivators. What is it people want to walk away from your educational event with, and how will they use that? Why did they even show up? And you can look up Knowles if you want to learn more about the andragogy and some of the other 6 principles of adult learning. So there are challenges with financial education. We know there's barriers and frustrations with outreach and access. We either need to be out there pushing our information out to people to catch their eye and their attention, or we need to be able to pull people in that they see relevance and would be willing to come in to access our financial education. We also know that learner needs are different. People have different motivations, different goals, preferences, which if you're working with someone individually, it's a lot easier to tailor your message versus if you are doing a group education or have some kind of static like a website or newsletter. And we also know there's some challenges that there are no universal standards to evaluate quality financial education or quality curricula or the effectiveness of that curricula. We might have some agreed upon, if you're going to do a budget, maybe these are some things you know, but there really are no standards of this is how you teach it. And with the next bullet point, this is who you're trying to reach with different messages. This is when people need the information. This is how many times a person needs to hear it to be effective. So we really don't have a lot of information on what's the most appropriate way to teach different concepts, how to assess those concepts. We do know in general that people do retain more of the knowledge than actually applying the behavior. So we just need to build off that a little bit more. And then with all challenges, there are opportunities. So thinking about the financial education opportunities, it's important to emphasize behaviors in addition to knowledge. So you can use that in terms of your applying. How can people use this information and how would it look in their everyday life? And then if we expand this to more of a financial capability approach, if you have the ability or can provide information surrounding access so that people also know where, how, when they can use this information. We also know it's important to connect learning and the doing with that just-in-time type of education. So knowing that people are only going to retain so much information for so long, can we try to get that information to people right when they need it or right before they need it, ideally, so that they'll be able to go forward and use the information right away before they start to lose everything that they've just learned. We also know that repetition is important, not just for one individual hearing an immediate message, maybe a weekly workshop, but just across the lifespan, knowing that you'll need different financial skills at different stages in the life course, whether you're a young student or starting out on your own as a young adult or even thinking about some kind of retirement planning and then being in retirement. So you're going to be paying attention to different messages over the life course. There's also opportunities to integrate financial education in with other services. The Center for the CFPB is looking at the integration with helping professionals with more financial education. So if you're out there meeting with people already, how do we sprinkle in some more financial education and start drawing people in and seeing that this is something that applies to them. And then finally, there are opportunities for evaluation, in terms of delivery, the effectiveness, the timing, and that whole financial capability mix in terms of behaviors and the access to different products. And I know here at CFS they are working on a common measures tool that we've been using at the University of Wisconsin. That I think that information is also available on our website. That's pretty much my overview, and I do have, these slides will be available later, so you do have some resources if you're interested in finding out a little bit more about where I started with this. Okay, thank you. And now I will be turning it over to Jamie.
Thank you, and good morning and good afternoon to everybody, wherever you may be. My name is Jamie Letcher. I am a financial advisor at Summit Credit Union. It's a $2 billion organization in South Central Wisconsin. I firmly believe and am committed to credit unions. They are cooperatives. They are member-owned. So income that credit unions derive is not paid out to shareholders. It is paid back into the organization to provide lower cost products on the loan side and higher dividend paying products on the deposit side, as well as in general lower fees than banks. But as a financial advisor within the credit union, I sit with people on a daily basis, and I sit with people from all walks of life as a practitioner. In the morning I can sit with someone who has $2,000 of savings, is 25 and just looking to get started. In the afternoon I can be sitting with someone that has $4 million to invest. And in the credit union we give them equal treatment, and it all comes down to education, coaching, and sometimes preaching, particularly for younger people that we sit with, because they need to hear things such as the time value of money, the need for rigor and discipline, and for living within one's income limits. But from my perspective, the purpose and goals of what I do on a daily basis with people is make sure that we're building a base by looking at insurance and protection needs, protecting the family in case of emergency, and also building a base relative to emergency funds. So that's crucial and the starting point for all of my discussions. Secondly, getting them on track to make sure that they are accumulating enough assets for the future. Is that retirement? Is it college funding? Is it a first-time home purchase? Could be any and all of the above. And how must they have the rigor and discipline to put actions into place that's going to attain those long-term goals? And thirdly, managing wealth, asset allocation, helping people understand the trade-off between risk and reward, and are they investing their monies in a manner that's appropriate for their age, their objective, and their risk tolerance, and making sure that that's a crucial part of the conversation. And ultimately, in retirement, creating a stream of income. Social Security, pensions, if any, but most importantly, their nest egg that they accumulate. How will that last their lifetime through a dependable stream of income? And if members or clients are so inclined, discussing legacy for kids and grandkids. So the characteristics of financial advisors within the world I live in, and that would include the Merrill Lynch's, the UBS's of the world. They're registered, licensed professionals. They go through rigorous and challenging licensing tests. And they also have ongoing training. We have continuing education that is never ending. And all of us need to have an expertise in investments, insurance, retirement planning. We also have to be therapists. In the market meltdown periods, we become very much therapists as opposed to anything else, in making sure that people don't panic and they understand the ebbs and flows of the market. And we also need to be able to tailor our advice, our coaching, to the individual's particular needs and goals. The process is fairly simple. A lot of questions. When I sit down with people, we will go through anywhere from 20 to 90 minutes worth of fact-finding, if you will, to understand all of the pieces to the financial jigsaw puzzle of that particular household, what their goals are, what their fears are. And then it's my job to come back either within that same appointment or at a later appointment and give them some suggestions, not to dictate, but to educate them on options and the pros and the cons of the options and the implications of not taking action for those options. And thirdly, the implementation is key. Much of what we do is try and instigate, motivate action. I often tell people, do it with me, do it with someone else, do it yourself, just make sure you do it. And lastly, coming together and review. I meet with some people quarterly, some semi-annually, some annually. But much like we go to visit the dentist once or twice a year, we need to make sure that we're keeping tabs on our clients and them, the financial advisors, to make sure that everything continues on as the plan dictates. So the client role is to be forthright, to be honest in regards to their fears, their tolerance for risk, if any, and to commit to the rigor and discipline that it takes to achieve long-term goals. All information is always confidential, and we all hold that sacred. So it is fairly straightforward. In summary, a financial advisor is that coach, that educator, that preacher, that planner, and it is incumbent upon everybody to seek out an advisor that is a good fit for their particular circumstances. I encourage people to seek out someone that is that educator as opposed to a salesperson. You want someone to sit on the same side of the table with you and walk them through what they need to go to get to where they're going. And that, in straightforward fashion, is how I live my life daily. That's all I have, Hallie.
Thank you so much, Jamie. Thank you, Peggy and Lucy as well. So now we'll move into the question and answer portion, which I have received quite a few questions from the listening audience. So let me go ahead and start. I'm going to pose this question first to Lucy. You can feel free to chime in, Peggy and Jamie, after she's finished. But this question is regarding the materials, so financial education, financial counseling, financial coaching, planning materials, and how language and translation of these materials can be accomplished. If you can provide any methods or strategies, Lucy, and then Peggy and Jamie.
Okay. I know exactly what they mean by materials. Is it so they can use in different settings and applications?
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and assume that it's meaning that a lot of materials are probably produced and are available in English, but many people have populations that, Spanish speaking, et cetera. And so what are some strategies or methods to, accomplish reaching populations where, materials might not be available?
Right. Yes, and it is very good questions. I work with some Latino populations, and you have to remember that you cannot disentangle culture from language. So any materials that are going to be producing and any messages that you are trying to come across, it has to be responded to the idiosyncrasies of that particular culture. In my experience as a coach, I found it fascinating that sometimes a question that you will ask one way in English is going to have the opposite effect in the clients if you just translate it without taking into account the cultures. So, but as in any situations, I will say that one way, one strategy, and quickly, so the other person can also tap in, it is really understand who your audience is. There are different ways. I mean, maybe you can have a quick focus group from, for example, if it is people from Vietnamese populations, have a focus group with some of the leaders in the Vietnamese community where you want to deliver that, have them give you input, have them give you feedback. Is this sensitive enough for this particular population? And then also will present the recognition that we are coming from different realities. So we want to be also sensitive to that part. Peggy or Jamie?
I would agree with everything that Lucy shared. And I would also say for a foundation or a base, you can look at what existing materials are out there, like the FDIC Money Smart curriculum, which is available in several different languages. And then, as Lucy suggested, perhaps work with community partners to see if this is appropriate for the particular audience that you would like to use it for. Or if you are able to translate and work with some of your own materials, I would say that's going to be even more effective because you will have a better working knowledge of what it is you're using and what's most appropriate for your audience.
Great. Jamie, did you have anything to add?
No, I don't.
Okay, let me go ahead and move on to another question. This actually popped up, Peggy, during your presentation, so I'm going to go ahead and pose to you. And it's regarding the use of pre- and post-tests and whether you think that these are appropriate way to evaluate the quality and effectiveness of a financial education or coaching or counseling session.
I think they are use of a pre and a post test or some type of assessment tool or measurement tool is a great start. As I had mentioned, there is still some debate and some experimentation going on in terms of what's a good measurement tool and what exactly are we trying to capture. I think it's a lot easier to capture changes in knowledge, and so usually some of our evaluations reflect that more so than some changes in behavior, which is more long-term and a little bit more difficult to capture, especially because it can be so different for each individual. I mentioned that the Center for Financial Security here at UW has metrics information on our 6 to 8 question measurement instrument. I also know that other organizations like NeighborWorks America has a success measures tool that different organizations are using where you can pick and choose from questions used for a pre-post. So there really isn't one tool that's out there, but I think we are getting a little bit closer to it.
Great, thank you. Let's see, I'm going to go ahead and this is actually a very specific question about a question or something that a lot of practitioners, especially counselors and coaches, probably deal with. And this is, how would I reframe the question, why is it important to have or make budgets? This might be good for Lucy to start with, Jamie, or Peggy, too. I mean, this is across the board.
Peggy, why don't you go ahead and start?
Oh, sure. Well, thinking about it from an educational standpoint, I would want to know what the person is already doing in terms of a budget. Mm-hmm. And, you know, if what they're doing is already working fine, if they're already saving for all their financial goals and have money left over and are happy with, then who needs a budget? But if what they're doing is not working, then I would want to know what's missing, or what would they like a budget to do for them? What information would they like to walk away with after having a budget? So I really would ask questions to get people thinking about, you know, it's kind of the why bother. So what will a budget do for them?
Right. Thank you, Peggy. Excellent. One way that I like to move away from the why is that the literature has shown that the why put people in defensive mode, and we don't want that. We want connections. So perhaps something as simple as what does the budget mean to you? And so then you can step on those feelings. And then also by using some other technique or reflective listening, when you put back those same words that the person has said, they start, no, that's not what I meant. But then also you can explore, there are going to be some items within the budget that are untouchable. And so it is interesting also to figure out what is about those items that are very important to this person.
I wouldn't add anything to that either. Very well said by both of them.
Great. Lucy, I am going to ask you this because this did pop up during your presentation, and honestly, I'm not sure if you had mentioned this theory or not, but someone has asked that you maybe speak a little bit on hope theory.
Okay, sorry, I keep putting the mute to the microphone. Yes. Hope theory, we talk about the financial coaching in general is basically if you want to have a theoretical framework for this new emerging field, I think we have to ground it in coaching psychology. And that is basically one of the theories that we can use will be hope theory. In hope theory, what it basically is allow you to use some technique and where you can envision that huge goal. Sometimes it is called, in goal theory related, that will be the ultimate goal. Sometimes we as financial educators put too much emphasis on those SMART goals, but SMART goals do not exist in isolation. We have to align those goals with our ultimate goal in life. What is that you want? So hope theory can give you some insight into how can we build this ultimate goal and then align those financial goals that we're discussing with the clients. I hope that answered that question.
No, I think that definitely did, and I think that person also was looking for also a name to go with the hope theory, as well as your excellent explanation. But I just would like to remind everyone that our PowerPoint slides will be made available on the CFS website, as well as the archived webinar. And Lucy, I'm sorry that we did lose a couple of your excellent illustrations due to, I think, the Adobe Connect add-in. Something happened with it. But I would like everyone to know that the PowerPoint in its full glory will be on our website, and it will have all of Lucy's excellent illustrations as well.
Yes, the person that he will look for is psychologist Charles Snyder. He has a lot of stuff on hope theory. He's the father of hope theory. Charles Snyder.
Great, excellent. And with that, I am going to say thank you so much to Lucy and Peggy and Jamie for your excellent presentations today. I think everyone learned a lot, and I think that having your perspectives were really, added a lot to this conversation. I would like to also remind everyone that we do have monthly webinars from the CFS University of Wisconsin-Madison. And our next month's webinar will be February 18th, and it will be on financial coaching frameworks. So we will be getting in to the topic of financial coaching a little bit more in depth, as we touched on that. Lucy touched on that some today. And please look for that registration email to come. Again, thank you so much for joining us, to our audience members, and thank you again to the presenters. And please do note that archived webinar of today's presentations, as